Go right ahead.
Great. Can we start with your name and your title?
Peter DeFazio, United States Representative, 4th District, Oregon.
Great.
Chair of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. There you go. Now you got it
all. One of your listed accomplishments was returning congressional pay raises to fund scholarships at 5 community colleges. Was Lane Community College one of those recipients? And can you walk me through how you accomplished that?
Yes, Lane was definitely one of the recipients. It's Lane, it's Lynn Benton, it's SWAC, it's Rogue, even though that Rogue is, I guess, I can't remember, it's in my district, it's right on the edge of my.
It's got a campus in it.
Yeah, and then one Douglas County.
SWAC, Umpqua Community College.
Umpqua, yeah. So there's those, so all in my district. Well, you know, I was turning back when I was a county commissioner. The county was in economic collapse, and you know, the commissioners voted themselves a pay raise, and I said I wouldn't take it, and turned it back because we were laying off people. People were only working 4 days a week, et cetera. And I just sort of started there. I get to Congress. And same thing, we were running these huge deficits, and I'm concerned about passing on, you know, a big burden of debt to future generations. Again, Congress voted for a substantial pay raise, and I said, well, I wasn't going to take it until we balanced the budget. And then I started giving it to a fund to reduce the national debt, but after a while, I thought this is futile. So I decided instead that it would be much more productive to give it as scholarships at the community colleges in my district. And it started out, at that point, we were seeing a lot of layoffs in the timber industry and that for dislocated workers originally. You know, and it's maintained now, but it's, you know, it doesn't specifically focus on dislocated workers anymore. I do 2 at each college, which pretty much pay the tuition. And that's close to 300 scholarships at this point. And it's been one of the most gratifying things. I mean, one quick story, I ran into a guy, he had gotten my scholarship. He had been working at the mill in Coquille, didn't even have a high school degree. And in those days, you could make a good living. He was raising a family, you know, had a boat, had a, you know, nice house, the whole thing. And like the 3rd time he got laid off, he said, I got to do something different. And he decided he'd go back to school. And first he had to get a GED, and then he wanted to go to college. And then the mill came back online, and they called him up to come back. And he said, I was really having trouble. We were having trouble getting by. And he said, I was tempted to go back. He said, but then I got your scholarship, so I didn't. And this guy then within 3.5 or 4 years, not only got his GED, he got a master's degree. And he became the superintendent of school in Powers. Then he moved to Ontario, Oregon, and now I think he's still superintendent of the big high school west of Portland, David Douglas. And I've run into numerous people, or they've written to me to tell me how, you know, it made a big difference in their lives. So it's one of the most gratifying things I've done.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Along the trend of LCC students, can you point to how infrastructure bills have affected LCC?
Well, you know, incorporated as part of the bill is going to be a lot of workforce training. You know, the building and constructing infrastructure now has become, it's not a bunch of people out there with picks and shovels anymore. The equipment's becoming very sophisticated, generally, you know, computerized, computer guided, and a whole different set of skills is necessary. And these are all good paying jobs because they're covered by federal law, Davis-Bacon. And the community colleges are a key place for people, you know, to train people to get into these trades. You know, that's one impact of the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, will have with the worker training. There's a lot more in Build Back Better, but at this point, future is pretty uncertain on that.
Yeah. What would you say to community members here in Lane County who believe that upcoming projects intended to increase bike lanes and pedestrian safety will only clog up the roads more? Specifically, the Main Street Safety Project here in Springfield has received backlash as providing too much space for bikes and not enough for cars.
Well, you can design streets to be much safer and still get automobile throughput. Eugene is doing that on Willamette now. Further out on Willamette, and it hasn't. They're making it much safer for bikes, but not dramatically restricting automobile traffic. Also, 11th Street, is it 11th or 13th with the synchronized lights? 13th, yeah, 13th Street. They have, it's very innovative. They have synchronized lights for the bikes coming and warning the cars, and again, it hasn't impeded the throughput. That plan was the former mayor. I don't think it was very well thought out. She was apparently enamored with large traffic circles, which take up a lot of real estate. And right now, I don't know that there's anything under consideration other than signalized crosswalk, because there have been fatalities out there. And and Springfield is working on bike paths and getting people off the street. So you'd have to talk to the mayor more about what the plans are over there.
Okay. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is the largest, most ambitious infrastructure bill to be passed since the creation of the federal highway system. What role did you play in its passing, and how is it going to be implemented in Lane County?
Well, I wrote a different bill called the Invest Act and passed it in the House twice. It went through a real legislative process. I set a very high number for transportation and a very ambitious goal of moving away from fossil fuel dependence. It took, I think one markup in my committee took 20 hours overnight because Republicans were so angry about, they say climate change doesn't belong in transportation bill. And of course it does. It's our largest single source of fossil fuel pollution. And so I passed it at last Congress. Obviously went nowhere with Trump in the White House. And then I passed it in this Congress, but the Senate couldn't even move. I had to deal with 3 committees over there. They couldn't even move the bill out of, and their sections of the bill out of committee. So ultimately the president had to engage because of stupid rules in the Senate and the filibuster and all that in a negotiation with, ended up with 10 Republican senators and 2 conservative Democrats. And I think I drove the number high. But a lot of my best provisions, strongest provisions on climate change weren't enacted into that bill because they were mostly all, opposed to the concept of dealing with climate. And now I'm working with the administration because there's $100 billion of discretionary money and other money in that bill to try and recapture some of the principles that are in my bill, like fix it first before you build a whole bunch of more highway capacity. First, fix what you have, including your bridges. And secondly, look at alternatives. Could you better do something else, like a project in Virginia where they decided instead of expanding the road that became very famous in the snowstorm 2 months ago, with another 1 lane each way, they figured out by the time they finished it would be just as congested. They decided to do a rail project instead. And I was going to make states look at that. And the administration is trying to implement those things with what's called guidance and the way they'll score grants. In fact, I was treated to being trashed by the Wall Street Journal on this very subject in an editorial recently, because they thought this was unconscionable that we should be doing fix it first or dealing with climate.
As the chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, can you share what the transition was like between Elaine Chao and Pete Buttigieg?
I have no idea what Elaine Chao did. So it's night and day. I mean, she did. I mean, I know some of the things she didn't do. I mean, there was an environmental impact statement sitting on her desk for 2.5 years to do the new tunnels under the Hudson. If one of those tunnels goes, you know, we're going to see massive road jams in the Northeast corridor and tremendous economic impact nationally. And you know, she just sat on that under orders from Trump or Trump's, you know, higher up minions. You know, she was just filling up space. I mean, she's Mitch McConnell's wife, and therefore she was rewarded with that job. And Mitch McConnell did very well with discretionary grants out of DOT. So now we've got, you know, Pete Buttigieg. He's smart. You know, he was a city mayor. You talked earlier about bike safety and that. He did complete streets in his town, didn't cause a controversy. In fact, people liked the product. You know, he's familiar with, you know, at a very small level with infrastructure issues. And when we first met, when he was named, you know, he said, look, I'm going to learn a lot. And he has. He's a very smart guy. He's learned a lot. And he's also, you know, he's very politically astute. We were having a huge fight over Christmas. The telecom industry wanted to turn on 5G, and they had withheld all the data. The airline industry, the manufacturers said, we think that it's going to affect avionics to the point where we're not going to be able to fly planes in limited visibility. We're going to have, which would mean that, you know, you basically about half the traffic or more than half in the US would be grounded. And the industry was very recalcitrant, and you know, so we're just going to turn it on. And finally, I've been dealing with this, and finally I had to call the White House Chief of Staff because they had the economic advisor negotiating with the telecoms. They said, it's not happening. You know, you need to put more juice into this. And he put the secretary, Secretary Buttigieg, in charge, and he got a 6-month agreement out of the telecoms. I mean, what we're going to do longer term, I still don't know, and that's a work in progress. But he facilitated that. So if Elaine Chao had been there, we wouldn't have had anybody to facilitate that.
Okay. So you spoke earlier that the scholarships was one of the things you're most proud of. Can you point to any other congressional achievements that you're incredibly proud of?
It's a kind of a daunting list, to tell the truth, because I've been going back through my old newsletters, and then we have these things we call accomplishment memos. I gave up on trying to go through the accomplishment memos. You know, there's just so much stuff, but early on, I did with Senator Mark Hatfield, the largest expansion of wild and scenic rivers in the United States. And then worked with Senator Bob Packwood to ban the export of logs off federal lands. You know, then when I was relatively junior, I created the national organic standards. You know, Oregon was way ahead of the curve on organics, and we had standards, but Idaho could say that stuff that they grew with fossil fuel, you know, inputs in terms of fertilizer was organic because there was no federal standard. And I partnered with Senator Leahy from Vermont, and it was the only amendment to the House. The Democrats were in charge, but they were totally opposed to the organics. And a guy named Kika De La Garza and Charlie Stenholm chaired the subcommittee. And it was the only amendment that passed on that bill that they didn't support. And we created the National Organic Standard. You know, so that's been a great legacy. I've done wilderness, Devil's Staircase Wilderness, what's the one, Jim?
Copper salmon.
Copper Salmon Wilderness, that I expanded. The Oregon Caves was on a very small footprint and threatened by grazing above and an overgrown forest. So I got that took a number of years to get the Oregon Caves expanded. We got that done finally, I think in 14. I also took on some long-term projects that just came to fruition. It takes a long time to get things done in DC. We've been collecting a tax on a small tax on the value of imported goods since the Reagan administration to create a harbor maintenance trust fund so we can maintain our harbors. And yet our harbors are shoaling in, the jetties are deteriorating because Congress has been diverting that money. So there's about $10 billion that's been diverted of those taxes, which are supposed to just be spent on harbor maintenance. I started working on that in 1996 with the Republican chair of the committee named Bud Schuster, and finally created a harbor trust fund a year ago in the big omnibus year-end budget deal. I had passed the bill out of the House unanimously. The Senate couldn't take it up, and we negotiated it into the budget deal. I also spent about 20 years trying to take away antitrust immunity from the health insurance industry. And I got that done in the same year-end budget deal. My committee did the largest investigation in the history of the committee, spent about 2 years investigating what happened with the Boeing Max. There was a lot of resistance to doing anything to change the way airplanes are certified. But after our investigative report came out, suddenly the Republicans got on board, and we dramatically modified the way planes will be certified and overseen in their construction and design in the future, so that we don't have corporations killing people for profit, which is what happened. They rushed the plane out the door. They put tremendous pressure on everybody in the organization, and the only person who went to jail was one test pilot. There should have been a lot more people investigated in what happened there. So that was a really, really big deal. There's now been 4 documentaries done on it. Rory Kennedy's is going to be released. I think the end of the month. Netflix bought her out. American Greed did one. Someone else did one, and then there's one pending. I can't remember. So, and I play a key role in all the documentaries with the investigation.
Very cool. Are you endorsing anyone to replace your seat? And if so, what advice do you have for your replacement?
Yeah, I'm strongly endorsing Val Hoyle. She's our labor secretary. This seat, I've seen some loose talk by a couple of the candidates saying, oh, any Democrat could get elected to this seat. It's so good now. Well, when I ran last time, it was a 2-point Republican seat. I would say now it's maybe a 4 or 5-point Democratic seat. That's not a slam dunk. Right now, Democrats are underwater nationally in the polling to Republicans. Biden's numbers are really low. Republicans are now targeting districts that are 10 and 12-point Democratic, and the 4th district is far below that standard. Val she ran a state race, state rep in my district in Bethel, Danabo, and up toward Junction City, which is sort of a microcosm of my district. It's very purple, it's not blue. And she won that seat. She was majority leader in the State House, did a lot of good things as majority leader. And then she got elected as labor commissioner. And when she ran for Secretary of State against Brad Avakian, but she lost because he carried Portland so heavily, but she won my district in that statewide race. And she won my district when she became labor commissioner. So she has experience with the district. She's done well in the district. She has name ID. She's a legislator. She's a fighter. And she is by far and away the best and only legislatively politically experienced person in the race.
Okay. So our readers were able to submit questions to ask for you. And one of the best was, how do you think the pandemic is going to affect Oregon long term?
Well, the pandemic has led to tremendous divisiveness, and Oregon has not been immune to that because of the politicization of mandates, masks, vaccines, and you know, that's going to be hard to heal over time. And you know, it's just created more polarization. And then, you know, I mean, and a lot of the social fabric got torn. People were isolated. They didn't see people. They just all got on social media. The social media, you know, has you know, moves people in. I mean, you know, into cults like the QAnon, and has, you know, brought about a rise in, you know, some radicalization of other groups in the country. And Oregon, unfortunately, is you know, is again not immune to that. So there are going to be long-term impacts. There've certainly been economic impacts, and you know, we lost a lot of small businesses until we finally, the Democrats finally passed a major package for small business relief. You know, after we took over, and the House and the White House and the Senate, and saved the small businesses that were out there that were still struggling. But an awful lot of people lost their business, lost their jobs, and it's gonna take a long time to heal. So it's been very difficult.
Along those lines, are you feeling hopeful that our democratic institutions can stay afloat amidst unprecedented attacks on voting rights and democracy as a whole?
The more we learn about all of the schemes in the Trump administration, the more memos that come out. You know, we were very close to having a coup. They tried everything they could. I mean, first they litigated, but they were essentially laughed out of court because their cases were Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell. I mean, you know, just you know, there was no legal basis for their challenges. Then they tried to intimidate election officials. Trump personally got involved in doing that, like Raffensperger in Georgia, and called them up and told them to find 11,000 votes. That's all you got to do is find me 11,000 votes. So this went on for quite some time. They considered using the military, you know, that jerk Flynn, who Trump pardoned, proposed, you know, essentially that you know, the military take over and we stage another election. They confiscate all the voting machines. I mean, all these things floated around in the White House. Trump entertained many of these things. You know, right-wing nutcases, like billionaire nutcases like the guy from My Pillow, you know, were financing this stuff, still are. And you know, it's very dangerous. And then the final thing was the night before, we tried to convince Mike Pence to violate the spirit of the Constitution and give him the election. Trump actually had been working on that a long time. He said in Pittsburgh on the 23rd of September, you know, if the Electoral College doesn't meet, or they don't count, I'm president, because every state gets one vote. We win. California gets one vote, Alaska gets one vote. And that was their last ditch plan. Get Pence to reject some of the electors, send them back to those states, which by that point had become totally politicized with the myth, the lie that the election was stolen. You know, and they would not have resubmitted electors in time, or would have submitted fake electors, and Trump would still be president. And that, when that didn't work, then the last ditch was an attempt to, you know, to overrun the Capitol, get a hold of those same ballot boxes, and disappear them, because it's just stupid 18th, 17th century, 18th century stuff. Envelopes, sealed envelopes in nice, beautiful antique wooden boxes. There's no other record of those things. So if they had gotten a hold of one of those, again, we would not have been able to establish the Electoral College by the date. But luckily, the boxes, along with members of Congress, were spirited out during that, as the Republican committee says, that peaceful political protest where one officer lost his lives. Dozens were injured, assaulted. The Capitol was totally trashed. It was just a normal tourist day, according to some of these dangerous Republican jerks who are elected to Congress, unbelievably. So yes, we are at a very perilous time for the future of our democracy. Now they've turned to trying to repress voting rights. In Georgia, they passed a law that they don't like the election, the legislature can change the election. And other states are looking at things like that. It's a very, very difficult and perilous time.
Yeah. On a lighter note, can you recall over your 36 years in Congress, any funny or inspiring moments and stories you'd like to share?
Oh God, after you just had me go through talking about that, thinking, there have been certainly lots of funny moments. I don't know. They're just not coming.
Hot mic moments.
Well, that's recent. Yeah.
Frank Moore in the water.
Oh, I've got to do some extraordinary things. Let's just say, I got to go to the South Pole with the Commandant of the Coast Guard because I was the senior Democrat on the committee, and they break ice down there. But the icebreaker had to go out and rescue a freighter, so they didn't have anything to do with us. So they flew us around, and we had a fabulous tour of Antarctica until the icebreaker finally got there, and we went out for a day. Just extraordinary things that virtually no one gets to do. And then Dan was just reminding me, there's this wonderful gentleman just died, Frank Moore. He had been a guide since the end. He had been a combat veteran, World War II, was on D-Day and all that. He'd been a guide forever, and he was trying to save the spawning area up Steamboat Creek from mining and other things. And I worked on the legislation, and we finally got it done. And Frank was 94, so he invited me to go fishing, but unfortunately it rained really hard the night before, so we weren't going to catch anything. But it's unique to get to go out with him. So, but we're in the Umpqua, which is full of ledges, where we were fishing, and he says to me, "Here, take my arm." And I'm thinking, oh God, this guy's big. He's 94 years old. I can't hold him up. And it wasn't, no. We come to a point where I'd step off a ledge. He'd just sort of pick me up, put me down. There's been some fun. The hike to Devil's Staircase. I assume a lot more people have gone there now that, it's become publicized as a wilderness area and that, but there were only, hundreds maybe of people since settlement, and who knows even if the Native Americans and the tribes went down in there much, because it's pretty rough country. It's the toughest day hike I've ever done, and I hike a lot. So I got to do that day hike, and then I said, boy, this needs to be a wilderness, and now it is a wilderness. So I don't know. I'm just not thinking any funny stories right now. Sorry, but
that's okay. So you're clearly an outdoorsman, and you are about to retire. Do you have big plans for retirement? How are you going to spend your time?
Well, I used to have a drift boat. It died of dry rot. I might get a drift boat again. I liked having a drift boat, and I want to learn. I started to learn how to spey cast, and I'm going to have more time to learn to do that. Spend some more time outdoors. I've always wanted to hear a wolf in the wild, and if they don't slaughter them all, and I'm fighting the slaughter of the wolves. I've been an advocate for wolves forever, and trying to get the secretary to reimpose Endangered Species Act projections, but there is a pack, you know, in the Wallowas, which is one of my favorite places to backpack. And someone said to me once, why do you, I said, someday I want to hear a wolf in the wild before I die. And it's becoming possible, except now we've suddenly taken a very sharp, bad turn, which I hope we soon can correct on wolves. So more time enjoying things I've saved or tried to save. One other fun thing then, of course, I co-founded with Greg Walden, the House Craft Brewers Caucus. And it is probably the last bipartisan thing in Washington, D.C. It's the largest caucus in Congress. You know, we used to have, you know, like 3 times a year would have brewers come in from around the country. I mean, that hasn't happened since COVID. It's been a little less fun, but through that, I got to meet, I got to go and address the Craft Brewers Association International Conference a number of times, and became good friends with Charlie Papazian, who was the guru who have written all the books about home brewing. He's now retired from that job. And,
Wow.
you know, so that was a fun thing, the Craft Brewers Caucus. And we actually did some real legislative things. We've had problems with the TTD who regulate, because they every beer label has to be approved under something that's left over probably from Prohibition. And when the government shut down a number of years ago, it was suddenly it was like a huge backup because they couldn't, I mean, even if you change the color scheme and the wording had to be approved, and they only have one guy there who did it. And so finally we got, you know, they now have 3 people who approve labels. So we still don't have protections if the government shuts down. But then the other, here's a funny story. So an inadvertent impact of the Food Safety Modernization Act passed when the Democrats were in charge, I think in 10. We were very concerned about the brain wasting disease, and so what cattle feed was to be regulated, because that would spread the disease if they ground up infected animals, and the Jakob-Creutzfeldt syndrome, and it could infect humans, and then it's a very bad way to die. So, but the law specifically excluded anything that had to do with alcohol, but somehow the FDA decided that they were going to get into the breweries, and a lot of the breweries use take their spent grain and they donate it to farmers, and it makes for very happy cows and pigs and all that. So, but then the FDA came in and said, no, you're going to have to individually package and sterilize that stuff and label it and do. This is nuts. I mean, we're talking about tons and tons and tons of stuff. And so I got a hold of the guy at the FDA who was in charge of the program, and I said, look, I said, do you drink beer? And he says, yeah. And I said, okay, I tell you what. I said, you ever been to a brewery? He says, no. I said, okay, I'm going to take you to a brewery. And there's a nice little brewery over in Alexandria this guy has, and I have my staff go check it out, and they say, yeah, this will be great. And so I take the guy there from the FDA, and he's impressed, because it's like, I mean, he's been in slaughterhouses and just places that are disgusting, and breweries are absolutely immaculate, because the enemy of beer is errant microbes. So he's just like blown away, like he's, wow, I had no idea. This is like so sterile. And it's like, okay. But then he says, but where's the spent grain? And I look, and my staff shrugs, and the guy who owns it says, oh, come on. And we go outside, and it's a really stinking hot summer day in DC. And there are these giant bins in the parking lot, uncovered, full of spent grain, covered by flies, birds, and everything else. And the guy's like, yeah. So anyway, I got them to not require it to be sterilized and bagged, but they do now have to put the spent grain in covered bins.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, well, I finally thought of something funny.
No, that was a great story.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Enjoyed
Thank
the interview.
you.
Thanks. Okay. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Yep. Bye.